I can still hear the sound of the lock, one small click, neat and final, like a signature at the bottom of a lie. My name is Odessa, I'm 60 years old, and the night they closed that door on me, the winter air didn't wait for permission. It rushed up the steps, over my ankles, right through the bones that built this family. As if the house had decided I was a draft to be sealed. It wasn't a dramatic fight. No plates thrown, no screaming, just sentences clipped into polite shapes meant to make cruelty sound reasonable. At your age, they said, eyes steady, voices practiced, you don't belong here anymore. We'll help you move into a facility. Pack in a day or two. If you won't, we'll make you leave. People think betrayal arrives like a thunderclap. Mine came like paperwork, notarized, witnessed, filed. I had already put the deed in a hand I loved because love taught me to prepare, to make it easy for those who come after you. I was wrong. Turns out, there's a difference between preparing a future and surrendering a life. The house sat quiet and clean around us, western light on the mantel, pictures, faint detergent in the air. The carpet didn't remember my knees from all those years of scrubbing. The walls had forgotten lullabies. Homes are faithful until they meet legal documents. Then they learn new names fast. I asked for time out of habit, not hope. I thought of the closets full of seasons, the shoebox of receipts, the tin where I kept the tiny things that prove a life. A ribbon from a church bake sale, a bus ticket from the day I got my first American driver's license, a grocery list where my husband wrote, "Don't forget cinnamon," and then underlined it twice like a joke only we found funny. I wanted to pack my history, but history is heavy, and the polite cruelty was on a schedule. 2 days, it's not long enough to unlove a home. It is long enough to count each step from bedroom to door, and relearn what it means to keep your back straight. The second morning, they stood by while I filled a soft bag with clothes and a toiletry kit that smelled of eucalyptus, a birthday gift from another era. They didn't touch me. They didn't look away, either. It was an efficient mercy. Outside, the street was too bright. The sky over this American suburb was a blue so clean it felt like it had been ironed. I set the bag down on the top step to adjust my scarf. That's when the lock answered. A small, businesslike click. Nothing dramatic. But some endings don't need thunder. I sat for a while on the low wall by the boxwood hedge, pretending I was waiting for a ride I hadn't called. Neighbors drove past in SUVs that blinked lane changes like apologies. A delivery truck sighed to a stop at the house next door. The driver jogged a package to their porch and grinned at their camera as if someone were watching. Maybe someone was. No one watched me. It's a strange thing. The first walk you take with no address in mind. I learned the world by its edges. The last house before the main road. The crosswalk where the signal counted down red numbers like a dare. The bus stop with the map no one reads. I carried my bag and the weight of legitimacy, my age, my good coat, my shoes practical and polished. I was not a picture of ruin. I was a woman recently missed. By dusk, the air turned mean. I found a diner with fluorescent lights and coffee that tasted like survivable choices. The waitress called me hun, which is the kind of mercy you can pour. I took small sips and decided on nothing until closing. Then thanked her with the kind of smile that understands we are both trying to be useful. Night is different when it doesn't end at your door. Concrete keeps the days cold like a secret. Parking lots hum. A far siren makes bad news sound official. I chose a bench near a church because grace felt geographically likely. I put my bag under my head, my coat over my knees, my hands inside my sleeves. I slept in brave pieces. Morning tasted like metal and wind. I washed in a public restroom and remembered how dignity is a skill. Warm water, cupped in your palms. Paper towels patted, not scrubbed. In the mirror, my face looked like me and my mother, and the women before us who carried far more than bags. I straightened my scarf and told my reflection, we are not done. By noon, I'd found the shelter intake window. The line bent around a wall covered in rules. The woman ahead of me smelled of lilacs and old smoke. She told me the Tuesday soup is better than Thursday soup because carrots have unions. I laughed. It came out crooked, but it counted. When it was my turn, the clerk asked for my name, my age, whether I felt safe. I said yes to the first two, and I'm learning to the last. She looked up at that, really looked, then slid me a form and a pencil that had been sharpened down to a stubborn idea. I wrote, slowly. The boxers asked for facts. I had a life. They gave me a cot number and a small locker. At the door, a volunteer pressed a pair of socks into my hands like a sacrament. New, she whispered, like the word might break if spoken too loud. I tucked them into my pocket and thanked her. New is not a word you dangle over a 60-year-old woman lightly. That night, on a thin mattress under a buzzing light, I stared up and counted how many times in my life I had started over. I arrived in this country with a suitcase and 2 stubborn feet. I learned its sidewalks, its job applications, its way of making room if you insist kindly and often. I could do it again, but I also knew something else, with the hard clarity that comes when the world believes you are disposable. I would not spend what remains of my life apologizing for existing. Somewhere between the hum of the vents and the soft chorus of tired breathing, I decided this story would not end on a cot. In the morning, I would go back to the world and look for anything with gripped documents, neighbors, an office that smelled like paper and law. I didn't know it yet, but the hand that would pull me from the edge was already moving toward me through the city. Someone who believed the law should answer to the heart as much as to the file. The lock clicked me out. Something else would click me back in. I didn't know how. I only knew this. My name is Odessa, and I am not done. 2 days. That was the deadline they handed me, like a cheap eviction slip dressed in polite words. You can stay here tonight, maybe tomorrow. After that, you leave either on your own or with our help. Their help was no help at all. I walked back to my room that night, and every corner of the house looked suddenly borrowed. The bed where I had prayed for my child's health, the kitchen where I had stirred soups while humming old songs. Even the family photos on the wall felt like strangers watching me pack. I opened my small wardrobe and touched each dress, each scarf, remembering when I had worn them. My wedding shawl, still folded carefully after all these years. The cardigan my late husband bought me one Christmas when money was tight but love was plenty. A silk scarf gifted by a neighbor when I first moved to the United States. Every fabric seemed to whisper, "You belong here," but the voices outside my door were louder, cold, clipped, final. "She's too old. This house is ours now." The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains as if it hadn't heard the verdict on my life. I made tea for myself weak, because even boiling water felt heavy. That day I sat at the edge of the bed. 2 days. How do you pack 60 years into a single bag? How do you fold a lifetime of sacrifice into a zipper? I chose carefully. A few clothes, my Bible, a tin box with old letters, bus tickets, and photographs, proof that I had lived, proof that I mattered, and one framed picture of my husband, because I knew I'd need his face to survive the nights ahead. By the second day, the air in the house had changed. It no longer smelled of food and prayers. It smelled of ownership and impatience. They didn't shout, they didn't curse, they didn't need to. Their silence carried the weight of 1,000 closed doors. When the moment came, I stood in the doorway with my small bag in my hand. My knees trembled, but my back was straight. I looked at my child one last time, searching for a trace of the boy I had raised. The boy who used to run into my arms after school, but his eyes were cold, his shoulders stiff, and I understood that boy was gone. They opened the door for me, not as family welcoming me out, but as landlords evicting a tenant, and when the lock clicked shut behind me, I felt a part of myself break. 2 days' notice. That's all the world gave me to stop being a mother, to stop being a woman with a home, and to start being a shadow on the street. But deep inside, even as I walked away, I promised myself, this story will not end here. Not with me on the pavement. Not with me erased. The first night on the pavement taught me things no book ever could. Concrete is colder than you think, even in early spring. Streetlights hum like tired guardians, keeping you visible, but never safe. And people, oh people, they see you, but they don't really look. I sat with my bag clutched tight against my chest, my back pressed to the brick wall of a closed pharmacy. Every sound became sharper. The rustle of wrappers, the shuffle of shoes, the sudden blast of a car horn. Each noise made me flinch, like the world itself was reminding me I no longer belonged anywhere. A group of teenagers passed by, laughing loudly, their sneakers slapping the pavement. One of them looked at me, and then quickly looked away, as though my presence was an inconvenience he didn't want to acknowledge. That look stung more than words. I thought about the warmth of my old bed, about the kettle on the stove that used to whistle for me every morning. My heart ached, not just for the home I lost, but for the respect I no longer had. A mother turned into a burden, a woman turned into a problem. By midnight, my body had started to ache. The ground pressed against my bones, and the cold bit into my skin. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, fear shook me awake. Fear of someone stealing my bag, fear of someone harming me, fear of not waking up at all. At dawn, I dragged myself to a public restroom in the bus terminal. The mirror showed me a woman I barely recognized, hair messy, eyes swollen, dignity cracked but not shattered. I cupped water in my hands, washed my face, and whispered to my reflection, Odessa, you are still alive. That means you still have a chance. The next days blurred together. I learned where to sit so I wouldn't be chased away. I learned which church gave free sandwiches on Tuesdays and which diner would let me sit in the corner if I bought the cheapest coffee. I learned that you can survive hunger easier than humiliation. But I also learned something else. I wasn't alone. On the third night, as I sat on a bench outside a closed gas station, an older man wrapped in blankets shuffled over and said, "First week's the hardest." He handed me half a sandwich, no questions asked. I ate it slowly, tears burning my eyes. The pavement had its lessons. Cruel ones, yes, but also quiet reminders that kindness still existed in unexpected places. And though I didn't know it yet, the pavement was only a chapter. Something was waiting for me just around the corner. A hand, a stranger, a chance. By the fourth night, my body was breaking. My back screamed from the pavement. My ankles were swollen from walking aimlessly, and my stomach begged for more than scraps. I knew if I stayed outside another week, I wouldn't survive. That's when I followed a small group of people heading into a church basement. A sign taped to the door read, "Shelter Intake Volunteers Welcome You." Inside, the smell hit me first: stale coffee, bleach, and damp clothes. Rows of folding chairs lined the hall, and at the far end was a folding table where two volunteers sat with clipboards. The people ahead of me looked tired but relieved. For the first time in days, I felt a strange hope. When it was my turn, the woman behind the table glanced up with soft eyes. She asked for my name, my age, if I had any medical issues. Her pen moved quickly as I answered. Then she asked, "Do you feel safe?" I swallowed hard. "I'm learning," I said. My voice cracked. For a moment, her eyes softened even more, but she didn't push. She just handed me a paper wristband and said, "You'll be okay here for tonight." They led me into a large room where rows of cots stretched wall to wall, thin mattresses, thin blankets, buzzing lights. It wasn't home. It wasn't dignity, but it was a roof. I sat on my assigned cot, clutching my bag, afraid to close my eyes. Around me, people murmured softly. Some prayed, some cried, some just turned their backs to the room. A volunteer walked through with a box of socks, handing a pair to each of us. When she placed a new pair in my hands, I almost broke down. Something as small as socks felt like a miracle. That night, I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of vents and the occasional cough. I thought about the house that used to be mine, the bed where I used to sleep. I thought about the cruel efficiency of being erased from your own life. But I also thought, this is not the end. This is the pause before something begins. The shelter was not dignity, but it was survival. And survival meant I still had a chance to fight. What I didn't know then was that the fight would find me first in the form of a stranger with kind eyes and a stubborn heart. It happened on a windy evening outside the bus terminal. I had left the shelter to clear my head, carrying my small bag and the kind of exhaustion that makes you walk slowly, as if each step must be negotiated with your bones. I sat on a bench near the entrance, watching buses hiss in and out, their doors opening to families, workers, travelers with plans. I had no plan, just a bench, just the cold. That's when I heard a voice. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I looked up. A young man, maybe mid. His jacket was zipped to the chin, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face serious in a way most people his age aren't. His eyes weren't just looking, they were seeing. I forced a smile. "I'm fine," I lied, clutching my bag tighter. But he didn't move. He sat down on the other end of the bench, giving me space but not leaving me alone. "You don't look fine," he said gently. "Do you have somewhere to go?" That question shattered something inside me. I had tried so hard to hold my story in, to keep it folded tight like a letter no one needed to read. But his voice, calm, steady, patient, opened the floodgates. I told him everything: how I had trusted my child, how I had signed away my property, how, after 60 years of working and building a life in America, I was told I belonged in a care home, how the door closed behind me and the streets became my bed. As I spoke, his expression shifted from concern to outrage. He didn't interrupt, didn't pity me, he just listened with a focus so sharp it almost hurt. When I finished, my hands were trembling, my throat dry. He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Listen to me. What they did to you, it's wrong. It's not just cruel, it's illegal. You still have rights. You still have a claim. And I promise you this, I'll help you. I'll take this to court, and I'll fight until everything they stole from you is back in your hands. I stared at him, stunned. A stranger, someone who owed me nothing, was offering me more hope than my own blood had. My lips trembled as I whispered, "Why would you do this for me?" He smiled faintly, almost sadly, "Because one day I'll grow old too, and if I end up in your place, I hope someone will stand for me. You deserve justice. You deserve your home." In that moment, on a cold bench outside a noisy bus terminal, my story took a turn. The pavement was no longer my destiny. A hand had reached into my darkness, steady and determined, and I realized I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The very next morning, the young man met me outside the shelter. He carried a notebook under his arm, a pen clipped to the front, and a determination in his eyes that made him look older than his years. "We can't go into court with just a story," he said firmly. "We need proof, documents, anything that shows the house, the property, the years you lived there." His words cut me with equal parts fear and hope. Proof? My whole life was proof, but most of it was folded into memory, not paper. Still, I thought about the little tin box I had shoved into my bag when they threw me out. My hands trembled as I unzipped the bag and pulled it out. Inside were scraps of my life, old utility bills with my name and address, tax returns with my signature, proof I had paid for that house year after year, a faded grocery list written in my husband's handwriting, family photographs with dates scribbled on the back. When I laid them out on the shelter's cafeteria table, the young man handled them like they were gold. "This," he said, lifting a bill carefully, "is stronger than their words. Paper doesn't forget." We spent the next few days gathering more. He helped me walk to the county office to request old records. We dug through storage boxes I had once left with a neighbor, bless her. She hadn't thrown them out. Each paper we found felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they tried to erase. But documents weren't enough. "We'll need witnesses too," he said. So we knocked on doors, neighbors, old friends, even the postman who had delivered mail to me for years. Some shrugged and turned away, but a few just enough nodded with quiet sympathy and agreed to speak if called. At night, back in the shelter, I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling, exhausted but lighter. For the first time since the lock clicked shut behind me, I felt like I had a chance. The young man wasn't just building a case, he was stitching my life back together, piece by piece. One evening, as we spread the papers out again, I asked him, "Do you think we'll win?" He looked at me with steady eyes. "We don't just think, we prepare to, and I promise, Odessa, we will." I clutched my husband's old photograph against my chest that night, whispering into the dark, "We're coming home." The courthouse smelled of old wood and tension. Its high ceilings and echoing halls reminded me of churches, except instead of prayers, the air carried whispers of legal terms, shuffling papers, and footsteps heavy with worry. I walked in beside the young man, clutching my small bag as if it were armor. My palms sweated, my knees trembled, but my back stayed straight. I told myself, "Odessa, you've faced worse. You can face this too." When we entered the courtroom, I froze. There they were, my child and the spouse sitting at the opposite table. Their faces wore the calm arrogance of people who believed the law was on their side. They didn't even look at me. To them, I wasn't their mother anymore. I was just an obstacle. The judge entered, and everyone stood. His gavel struck the wood, sharp and commanding. My heart jumped. The lawyers spoke first. Their side argued with polished words. The property was transferred legally. She willingly signed. They provided her a place to stay, but she refused. Lies coated in paperwork. Then it was our turn. The young man's voice was steady, almost fearless, as he laid out my story. He didn't dramatize, didn't exaggerate. He presented documents, the utility bills, the tax returns, the photos with dates scribbled on the back. Each piece of paper was like a stone stacked against their wall of lies. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, my throat went dry. For a moment, I wanted to shrink, to let silence swallow me. But then I looked at the young man beside me, his hand resting calmly on the table, and I felt courage stir inside me. I stood. My voice shook, but it carried. I gave my child everything I had, not just my property, but my years, my health, my life. And in return, I was told I no longer belonged in the house I built with my own hands. I was pushed out into the street at 60 years old. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because no parent should ever be until further evidence is presented. The gavel struck again. My knees weakened, but the young man caught my arm before I stumbled. You did good, he whispered. This is just the beginning. As we walked out of the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of my child's eyes. For the first time, I saw a flicker not of guilt, but of fear. And in that flicker, I knew the fight had truly begun. The second hearing came faster than I was ready for. I barely slept the night before, my mind chasing questions I didn't know how to answer. What if their lawyer twisted my words? What if the judge believed them over me? What if all those years of sacrifice ended in a single legal defeat? The young man sat beside me again, calm as a stone. Remember, he whispered, the truth is stronger than any trick. Just answer with honesty. Don't let fear speak for you. When it was my turn to take the stand, I walked slowly, gripping the rail as if it were the only solid thing in the room. The bailiff swore me in, and then their lawyer rose, buttoning his expensive jacket with a practiced smile. His questions came sharp, like arrows. Isn't it true you willingly signed over the property? Yes, I said, because I trusted my child. Didn't they offer to place you in a care facility where you would be looked after? They offered to throw me away, I replied, my voice trembling but clear. There is a difference. The lawyer frowned, adjusting his papers. He tried again. Isn't it possible you misunderstood their intentions? I lifted my head. A mother knows the difference between care and cruelty. I was told directly, you don't belong in this house anymore. Those were not words of love. For a moment, the courtroom was still. I could feel eyes on me, weighing every syllable. My hands shook, but I refused to look down. Then it was our lawyer's turn. She asked questions that brought me back to myself. How long did you live in that house? Over 30 years. Who paid the bills, the taxes, the mortgage? I did. Every single one. And why did you transfer the property into your child's name? I swallowed hard, my eyes stinging, because I believed love was stronger than paper. I was wrong. The judge scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. But in that moment, I felt lighter. The truth had left my chest and filled the room. When I stepped down from the stand, the young man gave me a small nod of approval. You were brave, he whispered. I didn't feel brave. I felt broken, exposed, raw. But as I sat back at the table, I realized something. Their lawyer had tried to turn me into a liar, into a confused old woman. He had failed. For the first time since this battle began, I sensed the balance shifting. The third hearing was the hardest for my heart. That was the day the evidence table filled with pieces of my past photographs, letters, documents I had kept safe for decades. The young man placed them carefully in front of the judge. A family photo taken in the living room of the very house they had thrown me out of. I was younger, smiling, holding a birthday cake for my child. Another photo of my husband standing proudly on the porch when we first paid off the mortgage. Holiday pictures with neighbors and friends, all in the same home, spanning years and years. As the photos passed from the clerk to the judge, my chest tightened. Each picture was proof. Yes, but each picture also cut me. Proof that once I had belonged. Proof that the house had been more than walls, it had been my life. When the judge studied them, my child's lawyer tried to dismiss it all. These are just sentimental, he said smoothly. They don't prove ownership. They only prove that she lived there at one time, which no one is denying. But the property was transferred willingly. Legal ownership is clear. I wanted to shout, to tell the court that love had been the contract, trust the signature. But my lawyer rose before I could speak. Your Honor, she said firmly, these photos establish continuity. They show 30 years of residence, 30 years of contribution, 30 years of sacrifice. They are not mere sentiment, they are context. They show the betrayal in sharp contrast. A parent trusted, gave, and in return was thrown out. The judge nodded slowly, eyes lingering on the picture of me holding that cake. He didn't speak, but I saw his jaw tighten. That was enough for me. But the hardest moment came when their lawyer, smug and deliberate, picked up one photo and held it high. It was of me and my child, arms around each other, smiling so wide it almost hurt to look at. He turned to me and asked, would you say, Ms. Odessa, that this picture represents love and trust between you and your child? My throat closed. My lips trembled. Finally, I whispered, yes, once. The room went silent. No one breathed. Even the judge lowered his eyes, as though giving me a moment of privacy in the most public place of all. I left that day with tears running down my cheeks. The photos had spoken for me, louder than my words ever could. They proved not just my years in that house, but the depth of the wound carved by betrayal. And wounds, when shown in daylight, can become weapons. The next hearing felt different. The courtroom wasn't just filled with lawyers and documents anymore at this time. People from outside had come. People who had seen me live in that house year after year, season after season. My neighbors. When I walked in, my breath caught. Sitting in the benches were familiar faces, older now, lined with years, but still recognizable. The woman from 2 doors down who used to borrow sugar, the retired mailman who delivered letters, rain or shine, even Mr. Thompson, who had watched me plant roses along the driveway every spring. They had come. The young man leaned close and whispered, "Today, words won't just be on paper. They'll come alive." The first witness was Mrs. Collins, my neighbor for over 20 years. She stepped carefully to the stand, her cane tapping the floor with each step. Her voice shook, but her truth did not. "I've lived next to Odessa since before her husband passed," she began. "I saw her mow her lawn, pay her bills, fix that house with her own hands. I watched her walk her child to school. I watched her shovel snow in winters when most folks wouldn't leave their beds. That house was hers in every way that matters." The lawyer for my child stood. "But legally, Mrs. Collins, the property was transferred. You can't deny that." Mrs. Collins straightened, her eyes sharp despite her age. "I don't deny paper, but paper doesn't cook meals. Paper doesn't pay mortgages. Paper doesn't raise children. Odessa did." The courtroom buzzed, and I felt tears sting my eyes. Next came Mr. Thompson, the mailman. He shuffled forward, his uniform cap still perched proudly on his head, though he'd been retired for years. He smiled at me before he spoke. "Every month for decades," he said, "I delivered bills and letters to Odessa at that house. She signed for packages, paid her taxes, and kept everything in her name. That was her home. I can't count the Christmas cards I slid through that door with her name on them." Their lawyer tried again. "You deliver mail, Mr. Thompson. You don't handle deeds." The old man chuckled. "No, I don't, but I know where a person lives. I know whose name is on the envelopes." And every envelope said the same thing: Odessa. The final witness that day was a young woman I hadn't expected. Emily, the daughter of a neighbor I used to babysit when her parents worked night shifts. She was grown now, with children of her own, but she still remembered. "Odessa was like a grandmother to me," she said, her voice firm. "When my mom couldn't afford childcare, she stepped in. She fed me, helped me with homework, treated me like family. She lived in that house all my life. Throwing her out was not just cruel, it was wrong." When she finished, the courtroom fell quiet. I sat frozen, overwhelmed. For so long, I had felt invisible, erased, discarded. But now, in this room, people were carrying my truth for me. Their voices stitched back pieces of my dignity I thought were gone forever. The judge leaned forward. His face was unreadable, but his words carried weight. "The testimonies confirm long-standing residence and community recognition. The court acknowledges this evidence as significant." As I left the stand that day, my child avoided my gaze, but I caught the spouse's eyes, and for the first time, there was no arrogance there, just unease. I walked out of the courthouse with the young man beside me. My hands trembled, but my heart was steady. The neighbors had spoken. The world was beginning to see. By the time the next hearing came, the fight had shifted. It was no longer about just my words, or my neighbor's words. It was about hard, undeniable proof. Paper. The young man had spent nights digging through files, making phone calls, standing in long lines at government offices. He told me, "People can lie, memories can fade, but records don't forget." When court began, our lawyer rolled in a cart stacked with folders. Inside were decades of my life written in black ink, property tax receipts with my name on them, paid faithfully year after year, mortgage statements showing my signature, proof I had carried the weight of the house until it was mine, utility bills, electric, water, gasol, tied to my name and that address, bank statements that showed every payment, every sacrifice. The clerk passed them to the judge, one by one. The pile on his bench grew heavier and heavier, until it seemed the truth itself had taken a physical form. Their lawyer tried to fight back. He flipped through one receipt and said smugly, "These are old. They don't reflect current ownership." But our lawyer struck quickly. Ownership is not just what's on paper. Today, it's what was built over years. This woman carried that house on her back. The transfer of title was not a gift, it was manipulation. These papers prove continuity. Continuity proves intent. I watched the judge's eyes as he read. He didn't show much, but his jaw tightened, and he underlined something on the page. Then came the moment that silenced the entire room. The young man produced the original deed transfer form, the one I had signed, handing everything over. I could barely look at it. My own signature felt like a knife wound. But our lawyer pointed out the details the young man had discovered. No legal advice had been provided at the time. No witness signatures beyond the notary. No record that I had been given independent counsel, despite my age. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, this was not a fair transfer. This was coercion dressed as consent, and the defendants knew exactly what they were doing. The courtroom went still. For the first time, my child shifted uncomfortably in their chair. The spouse leaned close, whispering frantically to the lawyer. I sat, frozen, my heart pounding. That piece of paper had once been my biggest mistake. Now, under the right eyes, it was becoming my strongest weapon. When the hearing ended, the judge spoke slowly. This court finds the presented documents highly compelling. Further review is required, but the evidence strongly suggests undue influence in the property transfer. We will reconvene after final testimonies. The gavel struck. As we walked out, the young man turned to me, his voice quiet but fierce. Odessa, we're winning. The papers tell your story better than words ever could. I looked at him, my eyes wet, and whispered, God sent you to me. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe it. Court battles don't usually turn in one dramatic swing. They shift slowly, like a storm cloud crawling across the sky. But that day, I felt the first crack of thunder. The hearing began with a surprise. Our lawyer had filed for temporary possession of the house, while the case continued. She argued that, since I had no safe place to live, and the court already recognized the evidence as strong, I should be allowed to return until the final decision. Their lawyer jumped to his feet, protesting. Absolutely not. The defendants are the rightful owners on record. She abandoned the home. Giving her access now would be premature. But the judge wasn't swayed by his polished words. He tapped the thick file of bills, deeds, and testimonies stacked before him. This woman lived there for decades. The evidence presented so far shows a likelihood of undue influence in the transfer. Justice cannot leave her on the street while we deliberate. His words struck like lightning. My breath caught. My child's face paled. The spouse gripped the table, their jaw tight. Then the gavel fell. Temporary possession is granted. Odessa will have supervised access to her home until this matter is resolved. I nearly collapsed. My knees buckled, and the young man steadied me with his hand. My chest swelled with emotions I couldn't name: relief, grief, hope, all tangled together. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed in, microphones flashing. One asked me, how does it feel to be going home after being forced out? I couldn't stop the tears. It's not just about a house, I said softly. It's about dignity. No one deserves to be thrown away. Not at 60, not at any age. That evening, with a court officer present, I stepped back onto the porch of the house I had built with my husband. My fingers trembled as I turned the key. The door opened with a groan, and the familiar smell of old wood and faded curtains washed over me. I stood there for a long time, my heart heavy. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first break in the storm, the first proof that justice was within reach. My child and their spouse had to leave that night, bags in hand, their faces red with anger and disbelief. They walked past me without a word. As the door closed behind them, I whispered to myself, the house knows me, the walls remember me, and no paper in the world can erase that. That night, I slept in my own bed again. The sheets smelled faintly of dust, the ceiling creaked, and my pillow was too firm, but for the first time in months, I felt safe. I wasn't just back in my home, I was back in the fight, stronger than ever. The day that would change everything began with heavy skies. Clouds hung low over the courthouse, and the air carried the scent of rain. I walked slowly up the steps, clutching the rail, every muscle in my body tense. The young man walked beside me, steady as ever, his notebook tucked under his arm. He didn't say much, he didn't have to. His presence was enough. This was not just another hearing. This was the moment when the case would reach its boiling point. The day all the lies, all the manipulation, and all the cruelty would be dragged into the open. Inside the courtroom, the room was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, pens and cameras ready. Neighbors had come again, whispering softly as they sat behind me. Even strangers who had read about the case were there, curious to witness the fight of an old woman against her own blood. My child and their spouse entered with their lawyer, their faces set in masks of arrogance, but I noticed the tightness in their movements, the restless glances they exchanged. The storm was reaching them too. The judge arrived, his gavel struck, sharp and final. "Today," he said, "this court will hear the closing testimonies and final review of evidence before deliberation. I remind both parties, this is not about appearances. This is about truth." Their side, their lawyer went first. He stood tall, his voice smooth and polished. "Your Honor," he began, "while we sympathize with the emotional struggles of the plaintiff, we cannot let sentiment overshadow law. The property was transferred legally. There is a notarized deed, signed willingly. There is no proof of coercion, only regret. Regret, though unfortunate, does not undo legality. My clients have every right to their home." He paced slowly, letting his words settle. "The court must not set a dangerous precedent where lawful transfers are overturned by emotion. Law is not about pity. Law is about fact, and the fact is the house belongs to them." His final words echoed, confident and cold. For a moment, I felt my chest tighten. Could it really be that all my suffering would be dismissed with such ease? "Our turn, then." Our lawyer rose. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held up the stack of documents, the photographs, the testimonies. "Your Honor," she said, "law is not blind to cruelty. Law is not deaf to betrayal. The defendants argue about facts. Very well, let us speak facts." She began to list them, one by one. 30 years of tax receipts with my name, utility bills and bank statements tying me to the property, witnesses, neighbors, community members who testified to my continuous residence, the deed transfer, signed without independent counsel, with no explanation of consequences, and followed almost immediately by my removal from the home. "These are not emotions," she said, her voice steady. "These are facts. Facts that reveal a pattern not of love, but of exploitation. A 60-year-old woman trusted her only child, and that trust was weaponized against her." Her eyes swept across the room. "If this is allowed to stand, then we are telling every elderly parent in this nation, beware. Love is not enough. Trust is not enough, because the law will not protect you. But I say the law must protect you. That is why we are here." She turned to the judge. "This is not just about property. It is about the fundamental principle that no one, no matter how close in blood, has the right to discard a parent like trash once the papers are signed. Justice demands restoration." My moment then, the judge looked at me. "Ms. Odessa," he said softly, "you may speak before we close." I rose slowly, my hands trembling, the room blurred with tears, but I forced myself to stand tall. "I came to this country with nothing but a suitcase and a dream," I began. "I worked until my hands ached, saved until my stomach was empty, and built a home where laughter once lived. That home was not just wood and nails, it was the proof of my life. When I signed those papers, I thought I was giving my child security. I never imagined I was signing away my own dignity. Days later, I was told my age made me worthless, that I belonged in an old age home. I was pushed out like garbage. My voice cracked, but I kept going. I slept on benches. I ate scraps. I cried in public bathrooms, asking God why my own blood had turned against me. But then, a stranger saw me. He believed my pain mattered. He fought for me when my own family would not. So I stand here not just for myself, but for every mother, every father, every elder who has ever been told they are too old to matter. I am 60, yes, but I am not disposable. And if the law cannot protect people like me, then what is it for?" I finished, my chest heaving. The room was silent. Not a whisper, not a cough. Even my child lowered their eyes. The turning point, the judge leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, he said, "This court has heard enough. The evidence is strong. The testimony's clear. I will deliberate and issue my verdict soon. But let me say this. The law may be written in ink, but justice is written in lives. And this case is not about ink, it is about lives." The gavel struck. The young man gripped my shoulder as we left the courtroom. "That was it, Odessa," he whispered. "That was the turn." And deep in my bones, I felt it too. The storm was no longer against me. It was breaking in my favor. The morning of the verdict, the world outside felt strangely calm. The sky was pale, the air cool, the streets unusually quiet. Yet inside me, storms collided. Fear, hope, grief, and a fragile spark of courage. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I had once served breakfast to my child, and stared at the clock until it was time to leave. The young man arrived right on time. As always, he gave me a reassuring nod, though his eyes betrayed the weight of what we were walking into. Neither of us spoke much on the way to the courthouse. Words felt too small for what was at stake. The courtroom atmosphere, the room was packed again. More reporters, more neighbors, even strangers who had followed the case. Some leaned forward, pens ready, waiting for a headline. Others simply wanted to see justice or injustice play out before their eyes. My child and their spouse sat at the defense table. Their lawyer looked confident on the surface, but I noticed his hands tapping nervously against his briefcase. My child's face was pale, lips pressed thin. The spouse whispered frantically into their ear, but I could see the unease in both of their eyes. The judge entered. Everyone rose. His gavel came down once, heavy as thunder. The judge speaks. I have reviewed the testimonies, the documents, and the evidence in this case, he began, his voice firm and deliberate. This is not a decision I make lightly, as it involves not just law, but family, trust, and betrayal. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to echo. The defense has argued that the property transfer was legal. That much is true on paper. However, the law does not stop at ink and signatures. The law also considers intent, coercion, and fairness. And the evidence here tells a different story. He lifted a stack of papers, the bills, the receipts, the photographs, the testimonies. For over 30 years, Odessa lived in, paid for, and maintained this home. She built it, she sustained it, and within days of transferring it out of trust and love, she was told she no longer belonged. This is not just cruelty, it is exploitation. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of reporters' pens. The verdict, the judge's voice, grew stronger. This court hereby rules that the property transfer was made under undue influence and without fair consideration. Therefore, it is null and void. All ownership rights and assets are to be restored immediately to Odessa. Furthermore, the court finds the defendants guilty of elder abuse and refers the matter to Adult Protective Services for further review. The gavel struck once, twice, like the heartbeat of justice itself. The aftermath in the room, gasps rippled through the courtroom. My child's lawyer dropped his pen. The spouse covered their face in disbelief. And my child, my only child, sat frozen, staring down at the table, as though the floor had given way beneath them. I, too, sat frozen. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then, slowly, the truth sank in. The house was mine again. My life, my dignity, my name, they were mine again. Tears blurred my vision. The young man beside me squeezed my hand and whispered, "You won, Odessa. You did it." But I shook my head. "No," I whispered back. "We did it." Walking out as we left the courtroom, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "How do you feel, Odessa? What do you want to say to your child? What will you do now?" I paused on the courthouse steps. The world seemed too loud, too bright. I steadied myself and said softly, but firmly, I didn't fight for money. I didn't fight for revenge. I fought because no parent, no elder, should ever be thrown away like garbage. Dignity is not something you give, it is something you defend. And today, dignity won. The crowd hushed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt taller than my years. The quiet moment that night, back in the house, I walked room to room in silence. My footsteps echoed, but this time, the echo didn't feel empty. I placed my husband's photo back on the mantel, exactly where it belonged. Then, I sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across the floor, and whispered to myself, the storm is over. The house is mine. But the scars, those will stay. And yet, even scars can be proof not of weakness, but of survival. The verdict, that's the natural climax. Odessa regained her dignity, her house, and her identity, while her son and daughter-in-law tasted the same cruelty they had inflicted. It stands now as a complete revenge and justice story, emotional, realistic, and powerful. Moral: you should never give away your property while you are still alive, because once it leaves your hands, you lose control over everything you worked for. And people's hearts can change with time. Love and trust are precious, but they are not protection against greed, pressure, or betrayal. Many elders who transfer their homes or savings too early are left vulnerable, sometimes even pushed aside by the very family they trusted. Property is not just land or walls, it is your security, your dignity, and the fruit of your entire life's struggle. The wiser path is to keep ownership with yourself until your last breath, and if you wish to pass it on, do it through a proper will or trust so that you remain protected while alive. Respect is not guaranteed by papers, but by maintaining your independence. So, guard your rights carefully, because once given away, they rarely return.